Hello everyone, it's Night Messenger, back with another horrific true crime case. Today, we are covering a monster known as the Otaku Killer. In late August 1988, the parents of a missing 4-year-old child received a box in the mail. Inside the box, on a bed of fine powder, was a photo of the outfit the child had been wearing when she disappeared, several small teeth, and a postcard bearing a message.
Mari. Cremated. Bones. Investigate. Prove.
The following content contains disturbing material. Viewer discretion is advised. Tsutomu Miyazaki was born on August 21st, 1962, in Tokyo, to a wealthy family. Tsutomu's family operated a regional newspaper company and were well known in the area. His grandfather and great-grandfather also served on the town council, and their family name had a positive image in the community. When Tsutomu was born, his parents couldn't have predicted their child's health. Tsutomu wasn't like normal children and was born premature, with a rare birth defect that caused his hand joints to be fused together, preventing him from being able to bend his wrists upwards. His parents were disheartened, but knew that due to their busy work schedule, they wouldn't be able to provide the care Tsutomu needed. He was mainly raised by his grandfather, and an intellectually disabled man the family hired as a nanny. Being raised by his grandfather, they grew a very close relationship together. Although, even being loved by his grandfather, Tsutomu's upbringing was still difficult. When he was able to attend elementary school, he was immediately shunned from his classmates due to his deformity, and Tsutomu having no friends, he began to solely keep to himself. He rarely participated in social events and often hid his hands in photographs out of embarrassment. However, he did enjoy drawing and enjoyed comics while alone at home. Though he wasn't a social student, he was still a successful one, and he ranked in the top 10 of his class. During the years in school, Tsutomu had excellent grades and passed all classes with flying colors. And during his late years, Tsutomu attended Meidai Nakano High School in Nakano, a prestigious high school associated with Meiji University, and continued being a star student. However, something would change, and his grades began to drop dramatically. By the time graduation came around, Tsutomu ranked 40 out of 56 in his class, and didn't receive admission to Meiji University. This is when Tsutomu's goals changed. Originally, he'd planned on going to Meiji University to study English and become a teacher. With his dreams being crushed, he decided to attend a local community college and studied photography so he could become a photography technician. Shortly after college, in the mid-1980s, Tsutomu moved back into his parents' house and shared a room with his older sister. While living under the Miyazaki household, Tsutomu's father tried pushing him to take over the family business after he had retired. Tsutomu's father cared about the family business and their public image. However, Tsutomu was convinced that his family only cared about financial and material success. Tsutomu told his father that he had no interest in taking over the business. Tsutomu knew that his family didn't really care about him, and he would state,
If I tried to talk to my parents about my problems, they'd just brush me off.
The only person he didn't excommunicate was his grandfather, who Tsutomu felt was the only person that cared about him and his personal happiness. By 1984, Tsutomu's strangeness only deepened. He began seeking out child porn in his free time, and also acted like a pervert, watching women on the tennis courts, taking photos under their skirts when he had the chance. Later, he became obsessed with porn magazines, until they became too boring. They black out the most important part, he once said. Though he lived with his parents and sisters, the only person Tsutomu connected with was his grandfather, which he spent most of his time with. Tsutomu even recalled during this period he considered suicide, but his grandfather helped him through the mental health crisis. However, in May 1988, Tsutomu's grandfather died, which inevitably deepened his depression and isolated him even further. Tsutomu loved his grandfather, and was completely shattered. In an attempt to retain something from him, Tsutomu ate part of his grandfather's ashes, and after this event, Tsutomu fell down a deep hole of darkness, too impossible to climb out of, which his family noticed almost immediately. A few weeks after the death, one of Tsutomu's sisters caught him watching her while she was taking a shower. His sister, frightened and creeped out, screamed, telling him to leave, which caused Tsutomu to attack her. When his mother learned of the incident, she demanded Tsutomu to spend more time working and less time watching whatever videotapes he was obsessed with behind closed doors. However, Tsutomu didn't take this conversation well and attacked her too. Whether Tsutomu Miyazaki had this disturbance in him all along or it developed in a response to his grandfather's death is unknown. But this would only be the beginning. On August 22, 1988, just one day after his 26th birthday, Tsutomu abducted a 4-year-old girl named Mari Kono while she was playing at a friend's house. Tsutomu convinced and led Mari back to his car, which was a black Nissan Langley, then drove westward of Tokyo and parked the car under a bridge in a wooded area. For about half an hour, the two just waited in the car. Then, after time had passed, Tsutomu murdered the young girl, took her clothes off, and then raped her. When he undressed her, he made sure to do it carefully and left her naked body in the woods. And then he returned home with her clothing. For several weeks, he let the body decompose in the woods, checking on it periodically. Eventually, he removed her hands and feet and kept them in his closet. Tsutomu then contacted her family. However, it took a few times before the family would answer. If nobody answered the phone, he called it until he got a response. Once he finally did hear someone pick up the phone, he said nothing and breathed heavily into the phone. Tsutomu then burned Mari's remaining bones in his furnace, ground them into powder, and sent them to her family in a box, along with several of her teeth, photos of her clothes, and a postcard. Later, in October 1988, Tsutomu abducted a second little girl. His second victim was 7-year-old Masami Yoshizawa, who Tsutomu spotted walking home along the road. And then, just as he did with Mari, he drove her to a secluded wooded area and killed her. Again, he sexually assaulted the corpse, left it naked in the woods while taking the victim's clothing back with him. By this time, panic had set in among the parents of little girls in the Saitama prefecture of Tokyo. This is when they dubbed the kidnapper and serial killer the Otaku Murderer. Within the next 8 months, the murderer would escalate as 2 more children would go missing, both young girls and both in the same manner. 4-year-old Erika Namba was abducted, like Masami, while walking home along the road. This time, however, Tsutomu forced her into the car and forced her to take her own clothes off in the back seat. Tsutomu then took photos of her, murdered her, and then tied her hands and feet, which was much different than his usual MO. Rather than leaving her body at the murder scene, he put her in the trunk of his car, dumped her body in a parking lot, and took her clothes and dumped them in a nearby forest. Like Mari's family, Erika's family also received a disturbing note, pieced together from magazine clippings. It read,
Erika. Cold. Cough. Throat. Rest. Death.
The Otaku Killer's final victim was the most disturbing. Tsutomu abducted 5-year-old Ayako Nomoto in June of 1989. He convinced her to let him photograph her, then murdered her and took her corpse home, rather than dumping it in the woods or a parking lot like he'd previously done. And big trigger warning. After Tsutomu came home, he spent the next 2 days sexually abusing the corpse, photographing her and masturbating, as well as dismembering the body and drinking the little girl's blood. He even munched on her hands and feet. As soon as she began to decompose, Tsutomu dismembered the rest of her body and deposited the parts in various locations around Tokyo, including a cemetery, a public toilet, and nearby forests. However, shortly after Tsutomu disposed of the body, he began to fear that the police would find the parts in the cemetery, and 2 weeks later, he returned to retrieve them. After that, he kept the dismembered body at his home in his closet. On July 23, 1989, Tsutomu saw 2 sisters playing in a park in Hachioji and tried convincing them to follow him. The younger sister was curious, but the older stayed behind. The older sister was suspicious and went to find her father. During this time, Tsutomu was taking photographs of the younger daughter, whom he'd convinced to strip nude. But his photo shoot didn't last long as he was caught by the girl's father. The father, sick and disgusted by what was going on with his daughter, immediately jumped and attacked Tsutomu, but was unable to restrain him. Tsutomu, like the coward that he was, fled on foot, terrified of being caught. However, he was kind of a dumbass, and realized that he left his car behind and knew he had to go back. So, eventually, he had to go back to the park to retrieve his car, which is when he was arrested by police, responding to a call by the father. After arresting him, they organized a search of his car and his apartment, which turned up incredibly disturbing evidence. In Tsutomu's apartment, police found over 5,000 videotapes, some containing anime, some containing slasher films, and others were homemade videos of himself abusing corpses. They also found photographs of his other victims and pieces of their clothing. However, the most shocking piece of evidence that they discovered was the body of his fourth victim, decomposing in his bedroom closet with her hands missing. Tsutomu Miyazaki's life was over, and his trial began on March 30th, 1990. His family, feeling destroyed about learning who their son truly was, immediately disowned him, and his father refused to pay for his son's legal defense, and he eventually committed suicide in 1994. Throughout his trial, Tsutomu remained incredibly calm. Reporters even noted that he was almost entirely unbothered by the things that he had done or the fate he was facing. Psychoanalysts, who also examined him during the trial, pinpointed that his lack of connection with his parents was an early sign of his disturbances. They also noted that since he had no connection with his family, he decided to turn to a fantasy world full of manga and slasher films to give him solace. Tsutomu answered questions calmly, and appeared almost rational in his thinking, despite the fact that he had committed all these senseless crimes. And when asked about his crimes, he blamed him on the Rat Man, an alter ego who lived inside him and forced him to do terrible things. And Tsutomu would spend a lot of time during the trial drawing Rat Man in cartoon form. The 7-year trial focused on Tsutomu's mental state at the time of the murders. During this time, Tsutomu stated the hardship with his family life. His family was more worried about their business than showing him love, often ignoring him and not listening to him at all. Tsutomu felt like he only received support from his grandfather, whom he was close to.
I felt all alone, and whenever I saw a little girl playing on their own, it was almost like seeing myself,
Tsutomu stated. As time continued to progress with the 7-year trial, the law continued investigating Tsutomu's mental health, because under Japanese law, people of unsound minds are not subject to punishment, and people having cognitive disability are entitled to reduced sentences. 3 teams of court-appointed expert psychiatrists came to differing conclusions about Tsutomu's ability to tell right from wrong. One team determined him to have a cognitive disability, while another concluded that he was a schizophrenic. The other thought he had multiple personality disorder. However, that team found that, although Tsutomu had a personality disorder, he was still capable of taking responsibility for his actions. The Tokyo District Court judged Tsutomu was aware of the magnitude and consequences of his crime, and therefore accountable. He was then sentenced to death on April 14, 1997. His death sentence was upheld by Tokyo High Court on June 28, 2001, and the Supreme Court on January 7, 2006. The Minister of Justice, Kunio Hatomaya, signed Tsutomu's death warrant on June 17, 2008, and he was hanged at the Tokyo Detention House on that same day. Tsutomu Miyazaki was a misunderstood child looking for love that turned into a monster in the world. He committed abominable crimes and pushed himself to the highest levels of sadism, to the extent of torturing the families of his victims. Tsutomu Miyazaki was a despicable human being, devoid of any feelings towards his community, and remains one of the most vile murderers whom have ever lived. This has been the case of Tsutomu Miyazaki, the Otaku Killer. If you found this case interesting, subscribe and stay tuned for the next case. This has been Night Messenger. I will see you all in the next video.